Hello, my name is Dr. Lowri Cunnington Wynn and I'm from Aberystwyth University. This is a preview of a lecture of Green Criminology, and this is what I will be discussing in this short video presentation today. These are my contact details should you wish to get in touch with me. The topic that I will be presenting on is Our House is on Fire, examining the climate crisis from a green criminological perspective. The session outline will include an introduction to the climate crisis, what exactly is it and what does it mean for us living on this planet. Then I'll briefly introduce what is green criminology, why is the climate crisis important to this topic. Then I'll be looking at climate change and criminology, why is this important, what are some of the issues that connect both climate change and criminology. Then I'll concentrate on environmental victims. Who are considered environmental victims? Are they human? Are they non-human? Are they both? And what does this mean for our criminal justice systems here in England and Wales? Then we'll look at climate-induced migration, things like climate refugees, so people who are forced to move because of extreme weather events. And then we'll look at recent environmental disasters, and I'll provide you with some examples here. So what is the climate crisis? So we would say that concern about global warming has been expressed for many years by many people, and this has also included criminologists. Now, criminology itself has been quite slow on the uptake here. It hasn't responded to the climate crisis in the way some other disciplines have, such as science, even geography, history and so forth. But we would say that today climate change is accepted by most as a serious and urgent issue. As extreme weather events intensify, as our climate changes, we are seeing more and more examples of climate breakdown. But many of its worst effects have been downplayed by those who have friends in high places, and this is something that criminology really focuses on, is the fact that some people have gotten away with some of the more destructive activities that they have had on the planet. People like Shell, people like ExxonMobil, for example, and this will be something that we discuss in more detail during the main session. But part of the concern is that climate and weather events seem now to touch or affect every person living on the planet. Things like the recent heat wave that we've had in the summer of 2022, what effect has that had? Drought, hosepipe bans and so forth. These are all very real examples of climate breakdown. So what climate crisis? The climate crisis will create social inequality and environmental injustice, which gives you a clue here in terms of how important criminology is to this. There will be increase in food shortages, undrinkable water, issues such as climate-induced migration and general hardships for all of us living on this planet. However, there will be some people who suffer more than others. Women, for example, will suffer more than men, people of colour more than non-Indigenous and the non-migrant, the young and the elderly more than the adult, and the infirm and disabled of all ages. And this is something that criminology very much focuses on. These people who will suffer more, these people who will experience much more victimisation than others. This is from the National Academy of Sciences and quoted in Lever Tracy. There is compelling, comprehensive and consistent objective evidence that humans are changing the climate in ways that threaten our societies and the ecosystems on which we depend. So those who are arguing that the climate has always changed or the weather was like this in the year of 1976 aren't really paying attention to the data that we have on the extreme heat and in terms of climate breakdown. So many recent assaults on climate science and more disturbingly on climate scientists by climate change deniers are typically driven by special interests or even dogma, not by an honesty to provide an alternative theory that credibly satisfies the evidence. We see an increase in people being targeted because of their beliefs and because of the science that they have presented on climate breakdown. Recently, a journalist was killed in the Amazon for the explicit reason that he reports on climate breakdown and the effect that logging in the Amazon is having on climate breakdown. And this is by Boyer 2012, with some cold hard facts about the climate crisis. The Arctic is warming twice as quickly as was initially projected in the worst case scenarios. In 2012, the rate of ice loss from Greenland was at an all-time record. The global food crisis is set to intensify as the effects of recent and continued drought and flooding in key countries continues. Now, this was written in 2012, and we know now in 2022 that there have been mass crop failures because of drought, because of the extreme heat that has been experienced across Europe and indeed across the UK. Half of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia have disappeared since 1980, and the water of the world's oceans now carries double the heat energy it held in the 1990s. And you can see here a picture of the coral reefs, which have been bleached because of this increased warming. And the current global emissions trajectory will see surface warming past 2 degrees by 2040 and past the catastrophic level of 5 degrees around the year 2100. Now, this is something that we are facing. All of us will be facing during this time, and none of us will be exempt from the climate crisis. Now, what is green criminology? What's the purpose of criminology in some of these discussions that we have about climate breakdown? So green criminology provides for an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary engagement with environmental crimes and wider environmental harms. So why environmental harms? Well, not everything that is harmful to the planet is illegal. So many of the things that in fact have that create the most damage to our environment and the things living on it are indeed legal. Things like legal logging, things like drinking from plastic bottles, driving cars and so forth. So criminology also looks at this idea of environmental harm as well as crime. So green criminology applies a broad green perspective to environmental harms, ecological justice and the study of environmental laws and criminality, which includes crimes affecting the environment and non-human nature as well. And this non-human nature is also really important because the criminal justice system that we have in England and Wales as it stands only focuses on these very human victims, so people like you and me. It doesn't consider things like rivers, trees, animals, for example, who are also victimised by our effects on the planet. And there is such a thing as climate crisis criminology. So climate crisis is of course the most important international issue facing humanity today. Yet, like I said earlier on, until recently not much focus has been on it within criminology. The main game seems to be street crime, gangs, cybercrime, domestic violence, which are of course really important crimes. However, other environmental crimes and harms are very pressing at this point in time. And there's hardly any work published on it within criminology. So what does criminology have to offer? Well, like I said, it's only very recently that criminologists have begun to consider climate change in any depth, and White and Hegenberg, who are very important researchers in this field, suggest at least the following reasons. So climate change is likely to be linked to conflict over natural resources, so whereas our lack of water and stuff intensifies, there is likely to be conflict around it, and therefore national security. Climate change may affect a number of bodily issues, raising questions relating to nutrition, the rights of the unborn child, and so on. And climate change and its impact on natural disasters, floods, earthquakes, and coronavirus. So recently the coronavirus, we all know about coronavirus, they say that it was related to the fact that us as humans have a closer relationship with animals, which means that these viruses are being able to be passed from human to animal much more widely. Carbon emission trading and its links to fraud and the displacements of people, so the fact that we can sell our carbon to other countries who perhaps don't use as much, which is linked to fraud. Climate change and victimisation, the potential for the poor to be most affected. And climate change and injustice, highlighting the unequal relations on which such changes are built, the fact that we have a huge amount of inequality in our society, and climate change will exacerbate that. And climate change and violent crime, there is actually a link between climate change and violent crime, specifically global warming and violent crime. Climate change can create more crimes of passion in the heat of the moment. So as temperatures increase, violent crime also increases. This is a trend that we see across crime patterns already. So warmer temperatures also increase violent crime days, with a high number. So days with a high of more than 85 degrees Fahrenheit spurred a 2.2% rise in general crime and 5.7% increase in violent crime. So intensifying climate change will likely increase future risk of violent armed conflict. We know when the weather heats up that violent crime also increases. And this idea of climate change victims, we will have human and non-human victims, as I said. Our criminal justice system as it stands is only geared towards those very human victims, but there will be other victims of environmental crime and environmental harms. We will have rivers, trees, plants. The polar bear here, for example, his habitat is being destroyed because of global warming, and they would be considered environmental victims. What does this mean for our very traditional criminal justice system? Victims of environmental harm and crime have been downplayed, and therefore environmental crimes are considered victimless. They don't have any victims. They are seen as victimless crimes. Environmentally harmful activities are also condoned by governments and industry in the name of the economy. So if it makes money, the economy is seen as so much more important than climate breakdown and the climate in general. And sudden changes in temperature, as well as shifts in climatic conditions, have implications for animals and plants. Heat stress, we know that birds are falling from the sky in the current heat wave in Europe. We know that wildfires increase and so forth. It will create much more stress. And this idea of a mass extinction, the fact that we are wiping out whole species of plants and animals, and even ourselves, perhaps at some point. Then we look at young people as victims. For children and young people, the present can seem pretty scary, as it is already a time when people are fighting and at worst killing each other over water and food. It is a world in which genetically modified organisms promise to feed the masses, yet hunger is more entrenched than ever. It is a world filled with lies and deceit, orchestrated by leaders holding the top offices. It is a world rapidly heating up, both literally and metaphorically. So during this session, we will look at young people as victims. How are you to become victims of environmental harms and crimes, or perhaps are already doing so? Then we'll look at ecocide. So ecocide is broadly understood to mean mass damage and destruction of ecosystems, severe harm to nature which is widespread or long term. And ecocide committed repeatedly over decades is a root cause of the climate and ecological emergency that we now face. Now they're looking to get ecocide as part of international law. It's something that many activists are wanting adopted as part of international law so that we can start protecting animals and plant life and humans as well. And then we have very real, recent environmental issues that we have all suffered from or have been privy to, and we have seen things like record temperatures across Europe have claimed at least 1,500 people, with train tracks buckling and raging wildfires. And we ask, who is responsible for this? Where will the justice come for some of these victims, those who died? The animals that died, the humans that died, the raging wildfires, people's homes, for example. Who will be responsible for that? A chunk of Italy's Marmolada glacier broke off in July, leaving at least 7 people dead. Flooding across Germany last summer, at least 200 dead. And of course deadly wildfires across Europe this year, especially across France, which have claimed some lives, and of course the animals and plants. So thank you. I look forward to presenting a full session for you very soon. Thank you very much.